Thank you very much for the invitation to present this evening. Just, by way of introduction, I am a program coordinator in the Koala Operations team. I giggled when the flyer went out and said we've got a whole range of experts. I'm no expert in anything, but I do manage a couple of teams and I do run a couple of programs in the Southeast Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy. You'll notice I have a bit of an accent as well. I'm South African originally, been in beautiful Brisbane for the best part of a decade now. Wildlife's completely different in Africa and Australia. They're pretty unique critters out this side of the world, but one thing I can tell you is that the threats that they face are very similar. There's nothing unique in what we're dealing with here. It's a global phenomenon, and there seems to be learned from that. But as I think everyone here has highlighted, it's challenging being a conservationist in the southeast of Queensland at the moment, and I suspect it's even more challenging being a koala in southeast Queensland at the moment. And we have a look at some of the news headlines we're seeing at the moment, and this is from March, but not much has changed. Perhaps Queensland, or southeast Queensland, Brisbane in particular, is booming. It is an area of massive growth and outstripping other areas in Australia. We have huge problems with homelessness, with rising costs of living, with unavailability of rental properties. 50,000 lots to be unlocked in the southeast Queensland to meet the demand for land. Infrastructure being put in to help cope with rising human populations and to help get us all to work to rescue koalas, to do whatever it is that we need to do. In the news recently, there's even people being evicted to make space for infrastructure along motorways. It's a crazy world, and it's a very, very challenging space for us all to be working in, and indeed to have ecosystems persisting. From a Queensland government perspective, a couple of years ago we launched the Southeast Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy. Now this strategy goes for 5 years, but the reality is it's going to take a lot longer than that for us to realise the outcomes. I think to put things in perspective, we've got to realise it's taken us 150 years to reach the point where we're at now. There's no quick fixes. We cannot turn this around overnight. We can't expect immediate results. It's going to take time, and it's going to take coordinated and a collaborative effort from all of us here, but members of the public as well. But what the strategy does do is it outlines how the government is going to deliver on the Koala Expert Panel's 6 recommendations for the most appropriate and realistic actions to address the decline in koala populations, and focusing on areas where there's the highest likelihood of success to facilitate the recovery and growth of koala populations into the future. So, main targets is to stabilise koala population numbers in southeast Queensland and hopefully see those increase through time, to have a net gain in total core koala habitat. Koala habitat restoration is a major part of this, and commence rehabilitation to restore 10,000 hectares of koala habitat, and for huge focus on threat reduction as well. So the strategy focuses on 6 areas of action in particular. So the first one being habitat protection, and quite recently introduced some of the strongest koala protection legislation that the states have seen, and hopefully we'll start seeing the impacts of that in time. We also have a strong focus on habitat restoration, threat management, improving our resources in terms of having better mapping, monitoring, researching and reporting, better community engagement, and having a strong focus on community engagement. This is a part of that, and it's powerful stuff. And then forming partnerships and having strategic coordination you spoke about it earlier, Dave. How do we pull all these parts together and get some really good outcomes? So that's a major focus area for us. So there was fairly recently, and we was a little behind time here, we had the first annual report for the first year of the strategy. We deal with the strategy on a line item basis, and there's hundreds of actions under the strategy. So we just have a look at some of the highlights, certainly from the state government. The strategy is very clear that it involves all levels of government, both local, state and federal, but it also involves the community as well. But some of the things that we're working on at the moment, as I mentioned, better legislation to afforded to koala, protecting koala habitat. Some 90,000 trees planted through that year through a whole range of habitat restoration programs. We've launched some state-of-the-art koala mapping and identifying best habitat areas for sustaining koala populations. Ongoing funding invested in the South East Queensland Wildlife Hospital Network. Funding allocated towards research grants. There's been a fair bit of talk about research going into chlamydia vaccines, and that's part of it. More money allocated to expanding our habitat restoration and partnership program, which is a key part of this. Hopefully some of you participated in the Koala Collab, which we ran, a similar event to this, where it's a whole range of technical experts providing updates on the amazing work that's happening, not only in the southeast but across Queensland as well. And you can see the funding allocated to the social marketing at Griffith team to help us with this, creating a more coordinated and community-driven approach to koala conservation, getting the community involved as well. And yeah, we're in the second year of this program, and this event is part of that as well. So I've covered some of these key programs previously, but another thing I'll point out here is that we have invested in and are currently working on a First Nations Koala Action Plan as well, to supplement it, to make sure we recognise the tremendous knowledge and understanding of managing these ecosystems and these species that we can only get from our First Nations people. So that is still under development with our policy team as well, and a really, really exciting area. The other thing I'll point out is the expansion of our new habitat mapping to cover the entire southeast Queensland bioregion, which some of you may not know reaches all the way up to Gladstone. It's quite interesting. Once we get to Gympie, we just have an absolute void of koala data. And we're having a look at the koala threat mapping that we are developing at the moment, and you can see a huge amount of koala data for the southeast. We know a lot of koalas. When you look at data, they all live along roads, which is quite weird. But as soon as you move north of Gympie, we know very, very little. And so we're hoping to address our understanding of koala populations outside of the southeast. So as I mentioned, part of the Koala Operations team. Now I specifically manage Daisy Hill Koala Centre, the Model Koala Rehabilitation Centre, and involved in a range of other projects under the Koala strategy. Through all my dealings, I think certainly engage with everybody who's presented, a number of other people in the audience here who haven't presented, but are certainly very invested in koala conservation one way or another. So it's a great position to be in, and I get an opportunity to work with some fantastic people and fantastic organisations. We also have our Koala Habitat Partnerships and Programs team and our Koala Assessments and Compliance team in the Koala Operations space. So the Mogul Koala Rehabilitation Centre, formerly known as the Mogul Koala Hospital, that was changed at around about the same time. They got a major refurbishment around in 2020. But the The Modern Koala Rehab Centre focuses on rehabilitation and ultimately the release of koalas back into the wild. Don't need to tell you, most of them present they are either sick or injured or orphan and in need of ongoing care to get them to the point where we can give them the best chance of survival back in the wild. And we do work in partnership with the other major wildlife hospitals in the southeast, Currumbin, the RSPCA and the Australia Zoo Wildlife Hospital, which is all part of the Southeast Queensland Wildlife Hospital network. But we also work very closely with the carers and the care network and collaborate very closely with researchers in a whole range of research programs. It could be ongoing research into chlamydial vaccines and those trials, research into post-release success, so many things that that team is involved in. So, as I mentioned, the centre was refurbished in 2020 and now really has fantastic state-of-the-art diagnostic, treatment and rehabilitation facilities. Built 2 pre-release enclosures, which you can see over there, which have been really fantastic and really heavily utilised in getting koalas prepared, getting them fit, getting their muscle tone and natural foraging behaviours before they are being released into the wild. The Daisy Hill Koala Centre, hopefully you've all visited there before. If you haven't, I'd strongly encourage that you do soon. It's fantastic. So prior to being in this role, I was the Senior Wildlife Officer based at Daisy Hill Koala Centre. And the Koala Centre has a strong focus on community education. We have a live koala exhibit which gets people through the doors. People flock in tremendous numbers to come and see our fantastic koalas. That's Jordan over there, kicking back. He's a quirky animal and people love Jordan. He's actually, if you do come and visit us soon, you might see him. He's down at Currumbin and he's part of their captive breeding project for their captive collection. So he's a bit of a stud. And he's a bit of a showman, as you can see. But yeah, as I mentioned, our focus is community engagement and education around koalas, koala threats, identifying sick and injured koalas, what to do when you find a koala. But we also have a lot of information there about other threatened species as well, a lot of the other projects that the department's involved in terms of recovering threatened species. And we have a lot of messaging around human-wildlife interactions, and it's seasonal. That little infographic up in the top right there is an example that we use for Share the Water and providing information to people around the legislation, but also the safety considerations about engaging with marine mammals. The humpbacks are migrating up and down the coast, making sure that not only the animals are left unharassed, but that people are safe. It's funny we have to tell people to stay away from these enormous animals, but there you go. That's what we do there. So massive visitation at the centre. We were very heavily impacted by COVID, as everybody else was. But yeah, we usually have upwards of 120,000 visitors a year, so we have a massive audience. We have members of the public just coming through on weekends. We have so many school groups that we're privileged to be able to engage with and talk about koala conservation. We have university groups, we have interest groups, conservation groups, scout groups. It's just a fantastic spot. It's based in the Daisy Hill Conservation Park. It's a great spot for a picnic or bushwalk as well. So, like I said, I encourage you to get down there if you haven't been down there again. We also deliver a whole range of projects under the Koala strategy. The team was responsible for delivering the Koala conference that happened last year as well. And we also do a lot of work with external partnerships as well. We've got ongoing research, as John spoke about, and with a range of university and researchers. One thing I'll point out there, and it's a beautiful acronym. Who mentioned acronyms earlier? Love a good acronym. But the SEQ network, which is the Southeast Queensland Environmental Education Centre Network. SEQ is easier. But that's a whole range of environmental education centres run by both privately but also through states and local government as well. We get together and collaborate and talk through all manner of community engagement activities as well, share resources and share information like koala conservation as well. So we have our koala assessments and compliance team. I won't pretend to understand what they do, but I've got some words definitely. But they do provide technical advice for developments that propose a clearing of koala habitat areas outside koala priority areas and against State Code 25, which is the development in southeast Queensland koala habitat areas. It's a big mouthful, and if any of you do have questions about that, I'll take those questions unnoted and I'll get the assessments and compliance team to respond to those a bit later. But that team also does take enforcement action if there is any unlawful clearing in koala habitat areas, and that's under the Planning Act. So there is a link there if you are interested in the legislative side of that. And a hyperlink doesn't help when you're sitting in the audience, unfortunately, but you are able to have a look and get a bit of an overview of that there. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we've got the Koala Habitat Partnerships and Programs team. This team has been working in the southeast for many years now, and through that time and across the properties that we have acquired, we've put almost 90,000 trees in the ground, over 505 hectares. Doesn't sound like an awful lot, 505 hectares. And when these properties were acquired, it wasn't so much about the size of the property, but it was about how these properties can create connectivity. And that's the key with habitat restoration. We can rehabilitate and restore all the habitat we want. If that are isolated patches of bush in the middle of nowhere, there's obviously some value, but by being strategic in how we acquire and how we rehabilitate these sites, we can get better outcomes and create that connectivity in the landscape. Those two photos taken up at a property in Chromehurst. I think that ridge behind there is this looking up towards Mullaney, and this property connects to areas of protected habitat, which is great. But those photos are only taken 8 years apart. And while habitat restoration is slow and it's extraordinarily expensive, it is incredibly rewarding. And it only takes a couple of years for all manner of wildlife to start moving in. It's not just about benefits for koalas. This is planted specifically for them, but it creates refuge for all manner of creatures. And we've seen a whole range of other threatened species turning up in this very, very young patch of newly created forest. So it's worth every cent that we all invest into it. And it's not only dollars, but it's blood, sweat and tears that go into planting trees and watering trees and weeding and keeping grass levels down. So our Koala Habitat Restoration Partnerships Program also got an injection of almost $5 million in a recent round of funding, and that's to expand that beyond what the department's doing. So working with partnerships, and initially it's been with the Queensland Trust for Nature to see how we can be more effective in engaging with private landholders in particular to get really good outcomes for in terms of habitat restoration as well. We're also fortunate in the recent announcements. It was quite well publicised that there was almost $25 million allocated to koala conservation initiatives over the next 4 years, and then a further $9 million was allocated to this to further that, to allow us to engage more broadly with external stakeholders and local governments to get better outcomes in koala habitat restoration. Everybody's touched on this tonight, but this is about why we're meeting and why we're talking. So what can we do? Each of us in many ways are doing different things. I get a sense when we engage with the public that a lot of people throw up their hands and say, I actually don't know what I can do to help koalas. I don't work in government, or I'm not a vet or a rehabilitator, or don't have property to protect or anything like that. But there are things that we can do. First thing is, it is important to have your say. And a few people have mentioned it. We have to have a united and very loud voice to make sure that conservation matters, not just koala conservations, because this is about ecosystems, it's not about any one species, but that we can make conservation a priority in a local, state and federal government, but also within the community. One of the reasons I stuck those newspaper clippings in, a lot of the community don't care about koalas. They're more worried about where they're going to sleep tonight. And I get it, fair enough. But conservation is not everybody's priority. For all the landholders that David engages with and that we engage with, who are more than willing to put covenants over their land and to protect or to restore their land, we deal with just as many landholders who are absolutely rabidly mad about the fact that they can no longer subdivide their property because of the new koala legislation. So this is my nest egg, this is my investment. How am I going to subdivide this and sell it all? So just because we think like it doesn't mean the rest of southeast Queensland thinks the way we do. So we do need to have our say, but we need to do it in a strategic way. So there's a couple of ways we can do it. One is through having your say in development applications. Now, each of you have the ability to, in whichever council you live in, or any other council for that matter, jump on and have your say when development approvals are there. You can do it, anyone can do it. When there's public consultation opportunities out there. There's a lot of public consultation that goes on with a whole range of matters that impact on conservation. We so often hear, well, what's the point? Nobody listens anyway. But that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if no one goes in and no one makes a compelling and evidence-based argument as to why something shouldn't happen, it's going to happen. So have your say. It is very important. I'll also flag, it's sometimes not easy to find out where to have your say and how to have your say. So sometimes you have to look quite closely to where those links are on a web page or where the community consultation is happening. And that's the value of joining a conservation or community group or an advocacy group, who very often do know where and what and how. And there's value in that. So I'd encourage you, have your say, make it known that you value conservation in your local area. I'll sum it up.